Hi everyone! In today's video, we are going to go over 3 basic stitches for embroidery. Embroidery refers to when we decorate or embellish a material with thread or yarn using a needle. Before we get started, we will need to gather some materials. You could embroider with a variety of threads or yarns, but today we will use embroidery thread, a sewing needle, some fabric, and I will be using an embroidery hoop, but that's optional. To use an embroidery hoop, first loosen the screw, separate the 2 hoops. Over the bottom hoop, lay your fabric, then slide the adjustable hoop over the top, stretching the fabric between the 2 hoops. Tighten the screw securely, and you have a nice smooth surface to start embroidering on. Then thread your needle, pulling one end of the embroidery thread through the eye of the needle, leaving about a 3-inch tail. At the opposite end of the thread, tie a small knot so that it doesn't pull through the fabric as you stitch. The first stitch we will do is called the running stitch. It looks like dashed lines. Before I start, I'm going to use a pencil to draw a very light line that I will use as a guide to follow as I create stitches. To start the running stitch, I will poke the needle up from the back side of the fabric, leaving the knot on the back. Then poke the needle back down, creating my first stitch that looks like a small dashed line. Now I will move the needle over before poking it back up through the fabric, leaving a space before creating my next stitch. For the running stitch, it's important to have evenly spaced stitches. Now let's start the back stitch. The back stitch looks more like a continuous line. You begin the back stitch the same way we started with the running stitch, poking the needle up from the back side of the fabric, moving over slightly and poking it back down, leaving a small dashed line. Again, like the running stitch, we will leave a small space, equal length of the stitch we just made, and poke the needle back up through the fabric. But now, instead of continuing in this pattern, we will poke the needle back down where the first stitch came out. Now when you pull the thread through, you can see that the 2 stitches line up and are touching. Because the back stitch gives the appearance of a continuous line, it's great to use for things like outlining. The third stitch is called the chain stitch. As you can see, we create small loops with the thread that look like little links of a chain. To create the chain stitch, we again start from the back side of the fabric, poking the needle through. Then we poke back down in the same spot that we came out, but we leave a small loop and don't pull the thread all the way through. When you poke the needle back up from the back side of the fabric, you poke it through the center of that loop. Then you pull the thread, not too tightly, otherwise you will misshapen your link. Continue making your chain stitch by poking the needle down through the stitch you just made, again leaving a loop. I like to catch the loop with my thumb. Then carefully poke the needle back up through the loop and continue making your chain stitch. You can embroider fabric, like in this example, but you can also use embroidery to embellish other materials, like painted canvas, paper, or photographs. Here are some examples of contemporary artists' work that include embroidery. Now that you know some basic embroidery stitches, you can experiment with adding embroidery to your artwork.